The meeting room was thick with the woody scent of mahogany furniture and the eerie silence of a war on the verge of being declared. Gabriel leaned back in his leather chair, a smug smile playing on his lips, while his father, Gustavo Montenegro, stared at him from across the table. "Gabriel, you can have any car you want, any woman you want, and play with the company's money all you want, but not without consequences." Gustavo's deep voice cut through the silence. "Dad, if this is another speech about my irresponsibility, I've heard it all before." Gabriel rolled his eyes, crossing his arms. "The company's doing great. The shareholders are happy. I don't see the problem. The problem is that you don't understand what commitment means." Gustavo slid an envelope across the table. "If you want my inheritance, if you want to be the next president of this company, you're going to have to get married." Gabriel let out a dry, ironic laugh, like he'd just heard the joke of the century. "You're kidding, right? I've never been more serious in my life." His father's stare was unwavering. "You have 1 month. Find a wife or forget your place in this company." Gabriel's smirk disappeared. He knew his father well enough to tell this wasn't a bluff. Marriage? For what? He had never needed something so outdated to get what he wanted. But this was the only thing standing between him and the family empire. And if his father wanted to play a game, then fine. He'd play. "All right." Gabriel raised his hands, like he was accepting an easy challenge. "I'll get married." "Good." Gustavo stood up. "And I hope you choose wisely." But Gabriel didn't care about the choice. Marriage would be nothing more than a contract, a mere formality. Love? To him, it was nothing but an illusion for the weak. 2 days later, Gabriel was sitting on the terrace of an upscale restaurant, sipping whiskey at a leisurely pace. His friends were talking about cars, trips, and women, but he was distracted. His gaze drifted over the busy street below until something unexpected caught his attention. A woman was walking on the other side of the avenue, engrossed in her phone. She wore simple clothes, a navy blue dress with no visible brand, and her dark hair was pulled up into a messy bun. She didn't fit the beauty standards he and his friends were used to admiring. She wasn't tall, she didn't have the curves of a model, and her face wasn't covered in the heavy makeup of the socialites he usually met. But there was something about her. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was just convenience. But in that moment, Gabriel decided she would be his wife. "Wait here." He set his glass down on the table and made his way downstairs with long, determined strides. He crossed the street with the confidence of a predator that already knew its prey had nowhere to run. When he stopped in front of her, the woman looked up, startled. "Excuse me." He flashed that well-practiced smile that always worked. "Can I have a minute of your time?" Isabella frowned, confused. "Do I know you?" "Not yet, but that can change." He slipped his hands into his pockets. "I'm Gabriel Montenegro, and I'm about to make you an offer you won't want to refuse." Isabella raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "And what exactly does the spoiled heir of the Montenegro family want with me?" Gabriel was slightly taken aback. How did she know who he was? But instead of stepping back, his smirk grew. "You have no idea what you're about to gain, sweetheart." Isabella studied him for a moment, then smiled, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't a smile of fascination or surprise. It was enigmatic. "I think you're the one who has no idea what you're getting yourself into, Gabriel." But he didn't hear the warning. He didn't see the trap he had just set for himself. In Gabriel's mind, this was just another game, a game he was certain he had already won. What he didn't know was that she already owned the board. After hearing the proposal, Isabella took a minute, as if carefully weighing her next move. Then she accepted. The ceremony was quick, with no big celebrations. Gabriel didn't even bother organizing a reception. To him, this marriage was nothing more than a signed contract, a formality to secure his position in his father's company. There was no emotion, just a handshake between him and Isabella in front of the judge. At the end of the ceremony, he looked at her with a cynical smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Montenegro. You just became the wife of the most powerful man in this city." Isabella didn't hesitate. "And you just married someone who knows a lot more about power than you think." Gabriel let out a short laugh, brushing off the comment. To him, Isabella was just another random woman lucky enough to cross his path. She didn't have the refinement of high society women, nor the breathtaking beauty he was used to flaunting at his side. She was discreet, dressed simply, and didn't seem the least bit dazzled by her new status as a millionaire's wife. That should have been a relief. But strangely, something about her lack of submission started to bother him. In the first week of marriage, Gabriel made sure to show Isabella who was in control. "Let's get one thing straight." He crossed his arms. watching her in the massive bedroom of the Montenegro mansion. I have my life and you have yours. This is just a deal. Don't expect love declarations or romantic dinners. Isabella held back a laugh. That's a shame. I've been dreaming of that since the moment we got married. Gabriel narrowed his eyes. Are you mocking me? Did you really think I expected anything different? She met his gaze with a calm look, almost like she pitied him. You need a wife to meet your father's demands. I agreed because I wanted to. There was something in her tone that made him uneasy, like there was a hidden reason, something he hadn't figured out yet. But Gabriel, as always, chose to ignore the signs. He started treating her like a ghost in the mansion. He didn't care about being home, spent his nights at parties, and returned only at dawn, indifferent to whether she was awake or asleep. But what irritated him the most was that Isabella didn't ask, didn't question, didn't show the slightest bit of interest. One night he came home at 3 in the morning, reeking of whiskey mixed with cheap perfume. He found Isabella sitting in the living room reading a book, calm, like his presence made no difference whatsoever. You don't sleep? He asked, tossing his jacket over the couch. You insist on coming home late. I insist on using the silence of the house to read. We both win. He frowned. Thought you'd ask where I was. Why would I? She turned a page. I already know exactly where you were. A strange chill ran down his spine. What the hell did she mean by that? Was she following him? Investigating him? But before he could ask, Isabella calmly closed her book and stood up. Good night, Gabriel. And then she walked up the stairs without looking back. He stood there for a few seconds, feeling an inexplicable irritation. What bothered him more? The fact that Isabella didn't seem to care about him at all, or the fact that she knew more than she let on? Days passed, and Isabella's presence became a constant disturbance. Gabriel was used to women who fawned over him, who craved his attention. But her, nothing. She was always a step ahead, like she was playing a game he didn't even know the rules to. One afternoon, during a lunch with friends and business partners, someone brought up his marriage. So, Gabriel, how's married life? One of the partners sneered, grinning. You, the most eligible bachelor in town, tied down to a woman no one knows. Must be boring. The others laughed. Gabriel smirked lazily, leaning back in his chair. I guess you could say my wife is discreet. The comment made everyone laugh again, as if Isabella were nothing more than an insignificant detail. But to Gabriel's surprise, she was there, standing right beside the table, listening to everything. She could have walked away in silence. She could have swallowed the humiliation. But instead she stepped forward, picked up a wine glass from the table, and raised it in a mocking toast. Yes, I'm discreet, and that's exactly how I like it. The laughter died down. The men fell silent. Gabriel turned to her, caught off guard. Babe, I didn't know you were here, Bud, he said, trying to sound casual. She smiled. I'm always where I need to be, Gabriel. Then she took a slow sip of her wine and walked away, leaving an awkward silence hanging over the table. That was the moment Gabriel felt something he had never experienced before, a strange, unsettling feeling that he was being pushed off his own board. Something was wrong. Isabella wasn't the naive woman he had assumed she was. And for the first time, he found himself wondering, who was she really? Gabriel had always believed he was in control. In every negotiation, every power play, every woman who had passed through his life, he made the rules. But now, standing in his father's office, holding a dossier that trembled in his hands, he felt like the ground beneath him was giving way. This has to be a mistake. His voice came out lower than he expected. Across the desk, Gustavo Montenegro remained expressionless. It's not a mistake, Gabriel. I knew exactly who she was from the beginning. Gabriel's blood ran cold. You knew? He laughed, but it was a dry, nervous laugh, like a drowning man clinging to his last shred of sanity. You set me up? Gustavo crossed his arms, leaning forward. I just waited to see how far your arrogance would take you. You thought you were doing her a favor by marrying her. Convinced yourself you had picked some insignificant woman to mold however you pleased. He let out a mocking chuckle. Well, my son, Isabella has more power than you will ever have. Gabriel looked back down at the dossier in his hands. Every word felt like it was burning into his eyes. Isabella Marquez, heiress to a business empire that in both numbers and influence overshadowed the Montenegro legacy. He hadn't married just any woman. He had married the one woman who could destroy everything he thought belonged to him. You knew, Gabriel repeated, his anger rising. He threw the dossier onto the desk. You let me walk into this humiliation. Humiliation? Gustavo frowned. What's humiliating, Gabriel? The fact that you were so blinded by your own vanity that you never bothered to find out who you were marrying? Or the fact that she's smarter than you? Gabriel clenched his fists. His father had played him. But worse than that, Isabella had played him. He stormed out of the office without another word. He needed to confront her. The sound of the Montenegro mansion doors slamming open echoed through the halls. Isabella was in the living room, a cup of coffee in front of her, flipping through a business magazine. She didn't even bother to look up when Gabriel charged in like a storm. "You played me?" She turned a page, unbothered. "I never lied to you." Gabriel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You made me believe you were just some nobody, that you were an ordinary woman with no power, no influence. You saw me that way." Finally, she lifted her eyes to meet his. Her voice was calm, but laced with something dangerous. "I never asked you what you thought about me. You assumed everything on your own." Gabriel's breathing was heavy, his heart pounded, and for the first time in a long time, he felt fear. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why did you agree to marry me, knowing damn well I was an arrogant bastard?" Isabella tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. Then she smiled. "You still don't get it, do you?" A chill ran down Gabriel's spine. "Get what?" Isabella set her cup down on the table and slowly stood up. There was no anger in her gaze, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty of someone who had always known exactly how this would end. "You still don't get it, do you?" she repeated, calmly smoothing out her dress. Gabriel narrowed his eyes. "Get what?" She took a step toward him, not in provocation, but with absolute control over the situation. "That I never needed you." Her voice was soft, but the impact hit like a punch to the gut. The silence between them was razor sharp. Gabriel blinked a few times, letting her words sink in. "Never needed him? You played at choosing me like I was disposable, but the truth is, Gabriel, I could have chosen anyone. And yet, I chose you." His chest tightened. "Why?" His voice came out lower than he'd have liked. Isabella gave a small smile, but there was something bitter behind it. "Because I wanted to see just how far your arrogance would go." Gabriel felt the weight of humiliation crash down on him. Every word she spoke was a blow to his pride, his ego, his confidence, his belief that he was always in control. It was all crumbling in front of the woman he never even bothered to truly know. Isabella turned and started walking toward the stairs. Before disappearing down the hall, she threw one last sentence over her shoulder. "Oh, and just so you know, what comes next won't be easy for you." And with that, she walked away, without hurry, without looking back. Gabriel stood there, frozen, as the truth settled in for good. He was never the one in power. Now he was the one in the weakest position. The morning after their confrontation, Gabriel walked into the company with confidence. He was still processing the humiliation of being played, but none of that mattered. He had a plan. All he had to do was ignore Isabella and take control. What he didn't expect was to find her sitting in his chair. "What the hell are you doing here?" He stormed into the office, eyes wide. Isabella glanced up from the papers on the desk and smiled, perfectly composed. "Taking my place." Gabriel let out a disbelieving laugh. "Your place? This office belongs to me." She picked up a document and slid it across the desk. "Not anymore." Gabriel grabbed the paper roughly and started reading. His stomach dropped. "This is impossible." "It's completely possible." Isabella crossed her legs. "My father acquired a considerable percentage of Montenegro Holdings years ago. When we got married, those shares were transferred to me, which means that now," she leaned forward slightly, "every decision you want to make, you'll need my approval." Gabriel felt a lump in his throat. "You think you can just push me out of the game like this?" "I don't need to push you out, Gabriel. I am the game." The way she said it, without raising her voice, without needing to threaten him, made Gabriel feel something he wasn't used to: powerlessness. Weeks passed, and Isabella made it clear that she was in charge. Every decision Gabriel made had to go through her. Every meeting was presided over by her calm, unwavering presence. He watched, irritated, as the company's board, once his loyal allies, now looked at Isabella as if she had always been the natural leader. At a corporate event, Gabriel was at the bar when one of his friends approached, laughing. "Looks like your wife doesn't need you for anything, huh?" The man took a sip of whiskey. "What happened to the great Gabriel Montenegro? Losing your spot to a woman?" Gabriel clenched his fists, irritated. "Don't worry, this won't last." But he wasn't sure he believed that himself. He glanced across the room and saw Isabella. She wore an elegant blue dress, her posture impeccable, her presence effortless. She spoke with important business figures, laughing naturally, fitting into that world better than he had ever imagined. And that's when something dangerous happened. Gabriel felt a sharp pang of desire. It wasn't anger, it wasn't frustration, it was something different, something he never thought he'd feel for her. That night, he came home late. He found Isabella sitting on the couch, barefoot, reading a report. "Don't you ever get tired of trying to take me down?" he asked, slumping into an armchair. She didn't even look up. "I'm not trying to take you down, Gabriel. You're doing that all by yourself." He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a heavy sigh. "What do you even get out of this? What I've always had a right to. You just assumed I'd never take it." Gabriel watched her for a long moment. For the first time, he allowed himself to really look at her. She wasn't the same woman he had seen crossing the street the day he decided to marry her. No, she was someone far greater than him. And the worst part? He was starting to like it. Gabriel had lost control before. But now he felt like he was losing something far more than power, money, or influence. He was losing Isabella. With each passing day, she cemented her place in the company. She was respected, admired, and, worst of all, she didn't need him for anything. Gabriel tried to hide his discomfort, but the truth was brutal. Isabella was far beyond his understanding. That night, he decided to confront her. Isabella was in her office, focused on some documents. Seeing her like that, so effortlessly in charge, made something twist inside Gabriel. He shut the door behind him with a firm thud, making her look up. "Can we talk?" She raised an eyebrow. That sounded more like a command than a request. Gabriel pressed his lips together, took a deep breath and stepped closer, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "You're driving me insane." Isabella smirked slightly, but there was no amusement in it. "Really? Never thought that was possible." Gabriel ignored the sarcasm. "I need to understand. I need to know why you did all of this." He leaned forward, his voice lower now, laced with an urgency he didn't even recognize in himself. "Why did you marry me?" Isabella set her pen down and laced her fingers together. Her expression turned serious. "Do you really want to know, Gabriel?" He nodded. Isabella let out a slow breath and stood up, walking over to the window. Silence filled the room for a few heavy seconds before she finally spoke. "You don't remember me, do you?" The question caught Gabriel off guard. "What?" She turned to face him, her eyes holding something he couldn't quite decipher. "We met before, long before this marriage." Gabriel blinked, trying to process what she had just said. "That doesn't make any sense." "Oh, it makes perfect sense." Her voice was steady. "You just buried the memory because it was convenient for you." And then, like she was ripping away his last line of defense, Isabella dropped a truth Gabriel never saw coming. "I was your first love." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. His breath caught. His heart pounded. "What? You didn't recognize me?" "Of course you didn't." She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "After all, I'm not the fragile girl you left behind anymore." The memory hit him like an electric shock. Suddenly, he was back in time, the small town, the summer, the girl with bright eyes who dreamed of changing the world, the girl he loved and abandoned. No. He shook his head, unable to accept it. But he remembered. He remembered the way she used to look at him, full of hope. He remembered the promise he never kept. He remembered the humiliation that made her cry that night when he rejected her in front of his friends, saying she would never be good enough for his world. He remembered everything. "My God!" He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the crushing weight of the truth. Isabella didn't waver. "Now do you understand?" Gabriel lifted his gaze, and for the first time since all of this started, he felt shame. "Isabella, She raised a hand, stopping him. "I don't want your apology, Gabriel. I just wanted you to know." He tried to step closer, but she took a step back. "You had a second chance." Her voice was quiet but heavy with a pain she had long since learned to control. "And you wasted it without even realizing what was at stake." Panic settled deep in his chest. "Isabella, please." She blinked slowly, like someone closing the final chapter of a story they already knew the ending to. "It's too late now." And with that, she walked out of the room. Gabriel stood there, alone, tasting the bitterness of his greatest defeat. He hadn't just lost control. He had lost the only thing that really mattered. Time seemed to be working against Gabriel. Ever since Isabella's revelation, something inside him had shifted. He wanted something money couldn't buy. He wanted Isabella. But this time, wanting wasn't enough. He tried everything. Sent flowers, dinner invitations, expensive gifts. Tried to catch her in casual moments at the company, letting his vulnerability show. But Isabella never gave in. She looked at him with that same calm patience, like someone watching a gambler desperately try to change the outcome of a game that had already been decided. And it had. That night, Gabriel decided to risk it all. She was on the balcony of the mansion, sipping a glass of wine under the city lights. He approached slowly, feeling like every step was harder than it should be. "You won't even hear me out?" His voice came out lower than he intended. Isabella didn't take her eyes off the view. "I've already heard everything I needed to." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I messed up, I know that now. I know I hurt you. I know I was an idiot. But I don't want to lose you." She finally turned to face him. Her eyes, always so analytical, were now unreadable. "Gabriel, losing something implies that at some point you actually had it." The words hit him like a punch. "You're saying there was never anything between us?" She tilted her head slightly. "There was, but only for me." His chest tightened. "And now?" Isabella let out a quiet sigh and stepped closer, stopping just inches away from him. "Now, I'm free." Desperation crept up his spine. "I can change. I can be different." She smiled. Not a cruel smile, just the kind that belongs to someone who already knows how the story ends. "You have changed, Gabriel, but not for me. You changed because you lost." The truth hit hard. "So, that means there's no more chance." Isabella studied him for a long moment. Then she lifted a hand and lightly touched his face like a farewell. "It means that this time you can't win." Gabriel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, she was already walking away. He watched as she stepped inside, picked up her purse, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic rising in his chest. "Wherever I want." She looked at him one last time, and without hesitation, stepped through the door. Gabriel stood there frozen, crushed under the weight of his greatest defeat. He hadn't just lost control, he had lost the only woman who could have taught him the true meaning of love. This time, he went all in, and he lost everything. So, what did you think of this ending? If this story kept you hooked, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know how far our stories travel. See you next time.